Guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we've got our next installment, I guess, of these new property chats that I'm trying to do on our YouTube channel, which is getting all the best experts in their individual fields onto a video with me. We just talk for about 20, 30 minutes. And today we're joined by the amazing Victoria. Now,
Hello.
hello, Victoria.
Hi.
I've got to quickly pre-frame this a little bit. Now, I've been in a state agency for 20 years. Me and the rest of my team all agree on this, that we have never dealt with such an amazing team of property solicitors, lawyers, conveyancers. We're going to come on to that in a minute. And it's just amazing. So
You.
welcome, Victoria. Thank you so much for all the help you give to us and clients from like 200 grand apartments to £2.5 million development sites. Like, we won't make this a sales pitch, but if anybody needs any property law advice, solicitor, conveyancer, lawyers, link in description to Victoria's team. They're amazing. Let's jump in.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So, Victoria, in brief, quick background of you and HCB solicitors.
Okay, so it took me a while to end up in law. I was in graphic design and then in the insurance industry previously. And then through just sort of opportunity, through family contacts, ended up getting some work experience in the legal industry, falling in love with it, and qualifying via sort of similar to an open university route by distance learning. Qualified in August 2015, joined HCB in October 2020. HCB has been around for quite a while. They are based predominantly in the Birmingham and Midlands area. I joined initially their Tunbridge Wells office to set up a new property law department. They didn't have a property law department at all in the south of England at that point of time. It's sort of the view, I was told it's going to take a while. We know it's going to take a while. No pressure, no expectation. Let's just kind of see how it goes. By the following summer, there was a team of 9 of us. I
Wow.
think it grew very quickly. We were lucky that I started in the middle of the stamp duty holiday. So that did help drive sort of organic referrals through to us where other existing law firms didn't have capacity to take on work for clients that they had dealt with in the past. So they were having to find someone new. So that helped, I think, for us to kind of get our foot in the door. And then, just based on levels of communication and good client feedback, our reputation's grown. And 3 years later, we've grown and it's all going well. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, that's why. So you're multidiscipline, right? In terms of property, anything need legally, get in touch with you guys pretty much, in it, because you've dealt with a whole breadth of stuff for our clients.
Yeah, so the company itself, exactly, multidisciplinary, any kinds of things, sort of family, wills, litigation, all kinds. In the Gatwick and Tunbridge Wells office, we are property or insolvency. So within those 2 offices, that's what we offer. But there are people in the other offices up in the Birmingham area that can deal with pretty much anything. And we've got family lawyer that we send a lot of work to up in that area.
But even that's really important. So we'll go on to it in a minute. Top tips on how to choose the best property lawyer, conveyancer, solicitor. We'll come on to it. But just the ability to, because some firms will only be able to conveyance your sale or purchase, but very few can handle, let's say, lease extensions and stuff like that, right? So that's really good that you guys can help with everything. And I guess what I'd say as well, before we go on, just to frame it as well, is I think where the reason you guys have done so well, you mentioned communication there, and I think we work well together, Power Bespoke and HCB, because we are very old school in our values and stuff, but we're
Yeah,
extremely forward thinking, young minded, innovative on the other side of things. So bringing the
yeah.
two things that there's some firms that we've had to deal with in the past that are only tech enabled, and it's like it's painful to deal with. I want to speak to my lawyer, please, on what's going on. So
It
that
doesn't suit every client either. Some, not quite so IT savvy, sometimes older clients, they don't want to deal with everything on their mobile phone, on apps. It just doesn't work. So I think being able to work via either route is quite important.
And I had a client recently. It was a £2.5 million house. They were like, "Can you?" I sold their house for them. They were like, "Can you recommend a client? I want to be able to drive there and sit down with them. She's elderly, fair
Yeah,
do." And so you guys were perfect for her. We've got other
yeah,
clients that are 26 years old, only want to work on email and tech platforms, and you guys are suitable for them as well. So I think
Yeah.
that's really incredible. So let's jump into nuts and bolts of it. Of like, I'm shouting from the rooftops at the minute, saying that us agents can be as good as we can be, but your sale will be made or broken at sale agreed progression stage between offer accepted and exchange of contracts. And the
Yeah.
big part of that is get the wrong solicitor, and it's going to go wrong most likely. So I asked you before this video to get your thinking cap on as if you were advising a fresh person, a newbie into choosing a conveyancing solicitor. What would your 5 tips be? So, what's your top tip number 1 when choosing a solicitor, lawyer, conveyancer to handle your property sale or purchase?
Okay, so I think possibly slightly obviously, my top tip number 1 is cheaper is rarely better.
Get what you pay for. Yeah.
Yeah, really, that is true. There are companies that you'll be able to find that will charge £300 for a sale or purchase. There are some that are sort of bigger, longer established law firms that you could add a zero on the end of that potentially, 2.5, £3,000. And then there's an array of pricing in between. And I think ultimately the cost does not necessarily reflect whether the conveyancer or the lawyer that you're going to work with is going to be any good. Cheaper is not always better.
I'll go deeper on that and say cheaper is most likely to completely cock up your sale or purchase. So if you're
Yeah.
spending 300, 400, 500,000 pound on a house, or you're selling a house at that level, do not scrimp on the legal person advisor who's going to be the most important person in that whole transaction.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. I want to remain professional about other people in the industry.
Yeah, you can, because you are one. I don't have to be.
Yeah, but yeah, no, exactly. But I think it is difficult, and I think that the sort of the level of experience and qualification that is needed to do this job properly, it takes a lot of time and a lot of money for that person to have reached a level where they're going to be able to accurately advise you. So when you're paying a few £100s for quite often an online company call center based setup, it's not necessarily going to be a qualified person that you're dealing with, which means that everything they're doing has to be checked off by somebody else in the background, which is just going to add more time to the process. And you're not necessarily going to easily be able to get hold of the person that you need to speak to, or to be able to easily get the answers that you need when you're dealing with someone.
And that's the point, right? What I'm trying to get at is like, there's a way they make it so cheap, and that
Yeah,
is generally you've got these what have been termed conveyancing farms, conveyancing factories, whatever you want to call them. But the crucial takeaway from that, I think, for people is that it might sound great, 300, 400, 500 quid, but they've probably got, I don't know, 50 underqualified people overseen by one person that's actually qualified to sign things off. And the
mm-hmm.
problem with that, it might work, but it takes ages. Like I've had things where I've rung up and it's like, what's going on with that sale? And they're like, just waiting for my senior to come and sign it off and look over it. And he's back from holiday in 2 weeks' time. And it's
Yeah,
like, come on. So I
yeah.
just,
Sorry.
well,
I was just going to say that's exactly my understanding of the setup. It would be quite a large number of unqualified people with a call center type setup. I believe sometimes you would get a specific individual allocated to your file, but if not, it's quite often just whoever picks up the phone will have a look at what happens next. That means it's quite a reactive rather than proactive process. And yet they're not qualified. So they are waiting or relying on somebody in the background who is qualified to check everything off and in order for anything to move forward, which just adds time.
and surely, like from a customer's point of view, I want to be speaking and liaising and dealing with the expert and the person that's reading the title, reading the lease, understanding it, knows what it means, and I can have a chat to the person that I'm paying for the advice about
Yeah,
it. Like,
yeah,
um,
definitely. Or at least in the way that we work, I've got sort of a very experienced legal assistant who works closely on my files and is aware of every single one of my clients and has her own relationship with them, so they know that they can pick up the phone and she knows exactly what's going on their matters as well. So between the two of us, we're dealing with everything, and they can ask for either of us and we'll be able to find out what's going on their file.
and that again, I think that's really how and why our businesses work well together, because our clients, literally, you are the legal version of us, as in like Steph is the agent handling everything. Kelly's in the office helping her out when she's not around. And
Exactly.
literally, once we've sold the house or agreed the purchase and we recommend you guys, it's the same operational setup.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that's important. Never undervalue the support staff, because they are absolutely essential to the successful running of this business. And they might not be qualified, those individuals, but they are working, like particularly my sister, she's working with me day in, day out. She knows my files back to back, and she can tell you anything that's going on with any of them, and can quite often step in for me wherever needed. So she's absolutely essential.
Love that. So, in recap, tip number one: cheap isn't always best,
Mm-hmm.
and just understand what you're getting for the money.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of bleeds into, I guess, some of the other points I was going to make as well. But yeah.
Let's go. Hit me. Number two. We're on a
Okay,
roll.
number two was just going to be sort of tied into the first point, really, is to check online reviews. But whatever the quote is that you've had, also check the company out online and see what people have to say about them. I think one thing that's fair to point out, particularly in the property industry, is that there will be some people, unfortunately, that have something negative to say, because it is an extremely stressful process. And regardless of what's happened, sometimes it's not perfect and you might have a couple of negative comments. But looking at the majority of the reviews and the majority of the feedback for that firm should give you a pretty good indication of whether they're doing a good job and what your experience is likely to be with them.
Yeah, exactly the same in estate agency, as in, like I always say, have a good look, a good route around the internet. Don't just look at Google or Facebook. Like, Google the company's name, go to page 3 or 4 of the search results, but have a balanced view. Because I remember not long ago we got quite a negative review, and it was really frustrating because when there's property transactions, there's links and there's other links in the chain that can,
Yeah,
and you're only as strong as your weakest link, as we like to
exactly.
say. But there was a chain collapse at the top, and we just got the brunt of the people's frustration because they didn't know who the estate agent was for that link of the chain. So we got the brunt of it. So yeah, that's good
Yeah.
advice. Go eyes wide open.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, everyone's human. If a ball's dropped, you want to avoid that. But if it does happen, it's then how's that dealt with afterwards? Because is a responsibility taken for that, and is that resolved? Then that's okay. It's moved forward and it's dealt with.
Yeah, love that. Number three.
Number three, I've got communication, which we touched on earlier, is just essential, I think, between all parties. So, as you've said, we have a good working relationship with you guys. And I think that's really important, that we've got not only a good relationship and good communication with our clients, but with the estate agents and other conveyancers or other people involved in the transaction. Because if we've got a working relationship and I can pick up the phone and have, a quick, easy, clear chat, then we can figure out what's going on and the best way to move forward on things. I think 9 times out of 10 that is the case. Unfortunately, we do sometimes have people or other solicitors on the side of transactions where they seem to forget that we're all trying to achieve the same outcome, and we're not litigators. We're not trying to sort of fight for our clients in, a battle of wills or whatever. We're all trying to achieve a property sale or purchase, whatever it happens to be. We should be working together collaboratively, and largely that is what happens. And so, yeah, communication with all parties in the chain, including clients, so that clients are aware of exactly what's going on, what you're waiting on, what you need from them, why you've asked for something in particular, a bit of an explanation as to, in layman's terms, what the legal point is that you're dealing with, so that they can understand where the matter is at and how, far off we might be from being able to talk about exchange dates and ultimately getting them moved in or getting their property sold, whatever it happens to be.
And how? So that's a really good point. Like, um, make sure you choose one that communicates well. But how do you test and find one that communicates well before you've signed on the terms of business?
It's a good question, and I don't know if you can necessarily know for sure, because it really does depend on who the fee earner is that will be dealing with your file.
And
As
sorry to interrupt, but a lot of the time with some of these firms, it's like quoting team, and they're like
yeah,
really responsive and
yeah.
quick, and then it passes over to the case handler, and then they're like asleep all the time.
Again, I guess that's where the research on reviews and anything you can sort of find out online might help give you a bit more information on that. But I think how quickly have they responded to your request for a quote? If you've put a quote request in online or over email, how quickly did they get back to you? When you then did speak to that person, how sort of clear were they? How happy were they to answer any questions and have a chat beyond the sort of how much are you selling your house for? Have you got a mortgage? Standard questions. Will they have a conversation with you further past that point? Answer any questions if you have them. If they can't answer those questions themselves, fine. And are they, is there someone available who's qualified who can give you a call back to answer those questions if you need to? I guess that's probably all you can do at quote stage, really, is sort of trying to tell what the communication level is going to be like. But as you say, it is difficult because a lot of companies do have a quoting department that don't have any sort of involvement in the transaction. So they're not the same people necessarily.
Yeah, and that comes down to communication and clarity, and how are their quotes presented to you as well? Like, are they nice and clear, or is it just like a dump on an email? Is it really itemized as to what are any other costs that could come to fruition highlighted?
Yeah.
I had a client, wasn't with HDB, but they were really they didn't take but they didn't go with our recommended solicitor, and then a few months later they were like, I'm really annoyed. I'm like, why is that? I said, because they had to do, I think, like a deed of variation, which is unexpected. I get it, but the solicitor had, I think, put a really high quote in their opinion for handling it rather than maybe preempting that before. And it's hard with you know I say to clients when choosing an estate agent, obviously research important, call 3 or 4 agents round, do your research, but I also say go and knock on the doors of houses that have got a for sale board outside of
Mm,
that company and a sold board, and get first hand feedback live in the moment. But you can't
yeah.
really do that with you guys, can you? Because
No, it's difficult, and the quote is ultimately it's an estimate of costs. And if
yeah.
things arise during the transaction that weren't factored in when the matter was quoted, then unfortunately we will have to charge for our time to deal with it. Because as much as I love my job, I don't work just for love. So
Mm.
there is that element of things. But I guess also if you're really unhappy, you can at any point move your file from that particular conveyancing firm solicitor's practice, and you can instruct somebody different. If it's that bad, and or they've raised costs that you weren't anticipating that you feel are too high, there's nothing to stop you. You can disinstruct that particular individual and find someone else.
Yeah, nice. And before we go on to number 4, at the end of this chat of these top tips, we're going to go into the differences between solicitors, lawyers, conveyancers, right? So
Yeah.
stay tuned for that at the end.
Well, that's top tip number 4.
Oh, love that. Come on then, let's go straight into it.
So yeah, I just a qualification is irrelevant. So you've got solicitors, you've got legal executive lawyers, you've got CLC lawyers, you've got conveyancers, you might have even a fee earning paralegal who might not have any qualification. I think for me, experience is far more important than the route in which you've qualified. So all those different terms are just the way that that individual has qualified. So a solicitor has
Okay.
gone via the degree SRA solicitor, ended up as solicitor route. You've got SILEX, which is how I qualified. So that's the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives. So I'm classed as a lawyer rather than a solicitor. I did my qualification via sort of a legal institution that works a little bit like an open uni setup. So I did my studies alongside working. So when I first qualified as an NQ, newly qualified SILEX lawyer, I was probably more desirable to employers than an NQ solicitor because I had quite a lot of work experience alongside my qualification.
Mm.
Um, the other route is a CLC lawyer. So that's the Council of Licensed Conveyancers. So that is a qualification that works very similarly to SILEX that I just referred to, but they deal with pretty much largely just property. SILEX is a sort of multidisciplinary, so any kind of area of law. CLC, they do other areas as well, I think, although I don't know enough about it, but sort of more property focused qualifications. So all your studies would just be on property. We had a guy working with us who had been doing it for 40 odd years but didn't actually have a qualification. So he was just an experienced fee earner. I can't remember what he was. I can't remember his job title. But he knew more than I did about some things because he'd been doing it for 40 odd years. So I think the name of the qualification that the individual has is largely irrelevant as long as they've got the right experience to be able to help you. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, so kind of relationship, communication, get that nailed first. And obviously, I guess to be able to offer the services, there's a certain level of, because the difference with a estate agency, right, is I could rock up, a random person could rock up tomorrow and bump their head and be like, I'm going to start an estate agency. And the next day they can be in someone's house advising them on the value of it and how to sell it.
Yeah.
Whereas your industry, I get, is a lot more regulated, and just to be trading as what you are, there's a certain level of qualification expectation that needs to be adhered to, right?
So again, that's a bit of a minefield because
Right.
a solicitor's practice has to be regulated by the SRA. But there are new sort of business models in place these days. They are called ABSs, alternative business structures. They can be run by conveyancers or sometimes just sort of business people who aren't actually legally qualified but want to sort of invest in that industry. So there are other ways of running them, and I think generally, in my experience, more of the sort of online firms that we referred to earlier are set up and managed in that way. So HCB is an SRA regulated solicitors practice. So we have, although I'm not qualified via that route, we do have solicitors that have qualified via that route. And actually, as a director of the company, I'm regulated myself by the SRA, even though I didn't qualify under them under that route. I still
Yeah,
am
nice.
regulated by them.
By their rules and stuff. Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's really helpful information for people. All right, so that's good. And then we've got the fifth and final
Yeah,
piece of.
so quite hard to sort of give you 5 top tips really at the quoting stage of the transaction. But I think the only other thing that I could think of that's quite relevant is that the location of the solicitor isn't necessarily that important. But I would say that like local knowledge of the area for the transaction is quite important. So the solicitor, conveyancer, as we've established, whatever they want to call themselves, could be elsewhere in the country and do just as good a job. But I think it is important that they have an understanding of the local area to an extent. For example, there's a new build development near where our offices are based, and we happen to know that it's being built by a consortium of different developers. A lot of the roads haven't been adopted by the local authority just yet. We sold one recently. The conveyancers acting for the buyer were sort of asking a lot of questions about why the roads weren't adopted, which is fine, perfectly acceptable question. But those that work in this area know that they haven't been yet because the development hasn't been finished. They will be adopted. No one's been asked for any maintenance contributions towards the roads yet because they're not done. And as soon as they are, they'll be adopted. So because we work locally in this area, we know that that's not something I would lose any sleep over if I were acting on a property purchase in that particular development because I'm aware of it. So having that local knowledge sometimes is really useful, I think.
Yeah, love that. That's actually quite. I'm thinking back to Power Bespoke, and again, we only serve clients that we do and can get to. And that sounds mad. I mean, we'll happily drive an hour potentially for the right client, but
Yeah,
we have sold stuff in like Aberdeen and Newcastle, but that's where the clients have come to us insisting that they want us handling the day to day of their property sale. But
yeah,
generally, we put ourselves out there as, we'll come to you, you can come to us, our viewing team can get to your house, we do all the viewings, and I think it's quite similar. As in, you might have to visit your office or maybe never, but if you did have to, or I guess my point on that is when it's right at the final stages and everyone's putting pressure on, and I've sent you the contract out to sign and return, put it back in the post, please do it recorded delivery, and it goes in second class post and everyone's up in arms over it. And if you just wanted to sign it, drop it back, it might save a couple of days of everyone's stress. And if
yeah. And then again, I think that depends on the individual because I've had clients, and I know my colleagues have had clients where it has come right down to that last minute. Okay, it's got to be done today. We had a probate sale recently where unfortunately the homeowner was very unwell, and it was okay, if we don't get this done, it might, sorry, not a probate sale, a power of attorney sale. But if we hadn't had it done on that day, then the individual who owned the home may have passed away, and then it would have been a case of waiting for probate, delaying the whole transaction by up to 6 months or more, God knows these days. But in those situations, I will go and I'll drive to the client and we can meet them somewhere, or they can come into the office, or I know that colleagues have done that, and they've met clients at their homes or wherever they've needed to get things signed, to get it done, because it's part of the job. You've kind of got to do that sometimes and be a bit flexible.
And it speeds it up. Yeah, I know of your team doing that recently for some of our clients, which is it's just nice to know that there's still good old fashioned service out there as well.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Those are 5 awesome tips. I learned a lot myself on that, so thanks for those.
it's okay.
Thank you very much for your time,
Thank
and
you.
I'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks.
Take care.
Bye.